Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Steve Hipkin, I'm a director, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the emerging threat of identity and cybercrime and some of the practical resolutions. So, a bit of background. I have previously done a webinar on fraud risk assessments, but I'm a forensic investigator. I've been with Vincents for since the middle of last year. Prior to that, with PwC, and the history of working with telcos, which gave me a lot of insight into the problems faced by identity theft and cybercrime. What we're going to talk about today, a brief agenda in about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, is what is identity crime. We'll intersperse this session with case studies throughout. There's 3 or 4 of those. And then look at how identity crime links in with cybercrime. And one of the issues there we'll talk about is the operational impact of cybercrime, because it's a human issue rather than just a technical problem. How can we protect against identity crime? So in that area we'll be looking to gauge your organisation's response. How do you respond to it? And also how do you address the issues of identity crime? And then we'll talk about who can help, including a new initiative of a joint public-private partnership, Identity Care Australia and New Zealand. And then we'll summarise. So, the new and emerging threat. There's been a rapid increase in the level of fraud in recent years, and I'm reading this from a report, and in particular a significant growing problem of identity fraud and identity theft. Identity theft is reportedly the fastest growing crime in Australia. For victims of identity theft, the impact can be devastating both financially and in reputation. Now that's emerging, that's a real problem these days, but in fact that came from the New South Wales Parliamentary Library Research Service in May 2003, so 12 years ago. ID crime and identity fraud was flagged as a big issue. So what's changed? Probably the technology advances in the last 12 years have made it easier to commit identity theft. So with tablets, with mobile devices, with internet, with wireless internet, all of these things didn't exist in the form they do now 12 years ago. So yes, the problem was apparent then, but the ability to perpetrate fraud is all much easier nowadays. We're an accounting firm, so a few facts and figures. These have come from the Attorney General's online householding contribution from 2013. But what's interesting here, I picked out of, is that 5% or 900,000 Australians over the past 12 months experienced some form of identity theft, which resulted in the financial cost to them. 85% of those were not aware of government victim certificates, and happy to talk about that at a later date. But government victim certificates is a document you can receive to take to organisations, insurers, banks, building societies, if you have had your identity compromised, to give some validity to that issue. Some of the operational factors: 18 hours were spent on average per victim in response to their incident. However, half the sample size spent 3 hours or less. 2 ways to look at that. One is that when identity gets compromised, it can be a fairly exhaustive personal toll on you, or you look and say people aren't taking it seriously in how they protect their identity following an incident. The average out-of-pocket costs were about $5,700 per incident, and almost half of the victims detected the events themselves, and that's something we'd like to change with organisations becoming proactive in the research and identification of potential problems. So what is identity crime? There's a few standard definitions, and you can see them on the screen there. Identity is either a person's identity or a corporate's identity. Fabrication, identity fabrication is the creation of a fictitious identity, so a false identity. Identity manipulation is altering one's own identity, and that may be used for people bypassing black marks for credit rating, etc. Identity theft is the theft or assumption of someone's pre-existing identity, either with or without consent. So interesting there that if you collude, it can still be identity theft. And identity crime is crime perpetrated using identity theft. Let's look at a case study. Personal information stolen from mailboxes used in superannuation identity fraud. What's interesting here is the secondary impact of the fraud risk and the fraud perpetrated. So members of an organised criminal syndicate stole cheques, superannuation statements and personal bank statements from mailboxes and used these to produce high-quality counterfeit ID documents. So the first issue is there's a theft of personal information. The question is, how's that going to be used in order to perpetrate fraud? They were then used to conduct frauds against superannuation accounts. So after assuming a genuine person's identity, they set up a self-managed super fund. They would then contact the victim's superannuation provider and request that they roll over funds from legitimate superannuation into the fraudulent self-managed super fund. Following a coordinated multi-agency investigation, 25 syndicate members were charged with more than 2,500 offences involving the laundering of over $8 million in fraudulently obtained funds. So individuals are being impacted here, but then there's significant organised crime behind identity theft. So how do you go about protecting your identity? Some of these will be familiar to you, some will be new. I think the message I would give is not to overreact, but don't underreact. The way business and life goes about today, we're very reliant on the internet, web banking, online shopping, and it's not to say that these can't be successfully and securely dealt with, but there's a few tips that need to be bear in mind. And I'll pick on a couple of them. So be cautious of who you provide your personal and financial information to. Ensure that there's a legitimate reason to supply your details. And don't be reluctant to challenge and quiz. Use only trusted online payment websites for items won on online auctions or purchased online. Never make payments outside of a trusted system, particularly for goods which you've not yet received. And a lot of this is common sense. If something looks too good to be true, then it probably is. And the importance of virus and security software, because we'll talk a little bit later about types of ways online fraud is perpetrated. Security software is a bit like car insurance, that you're not interested until you've had an accident, but very important all the same. Be careful about release fees or legal fees when protecting your identity. If responding to online employment or rental adverts, be wary of transmitting personal information and copies of documents via email or electronically. If asked to attend an interview, do some prior research to confirm legitimacy. So online interviewing and employment is a new area of scam risk. You can check your own credit file. You can order these from the 3 Australian and New Zealand credit bureaus for free, and that will enable you to see whether you've got any defaults or blacklistings against your credit rating. Let's look at another case study, exploiting a corrupted employee to obtain ID credentials. So in this case, it's secondary fraud. In a 7-year period, a Victorian man employed by an accredited tester for heavy vehicle licensing signed off 650 fraudulent heavy vehicle certificates in return for cash payment. The certificates were then subsequently used as evidence of passing an HGV driving test and was required to obtain appropriate driver licenses. So the value to the fraudulent person was probably nominal, maybe getting $50 a time, but potentially the knock-on effect could be significantly higher. So where does cybercrime fit in? It's an enabler of ID theft and crime. Cybercrime is a bit of an anomaly because it's really cyber technology used to perpetrate knock-on crime. It's an enabler of identity fraud, targeting either individuals or businesses. There are statutory and treaty laws which describe what cybercrime is. However, a broader meaning is given to cybercrime on a business commercial level. And this is the impact of cybercrime is all important. So the impact on day-to-day operations, business loss, disruption, for example, and more of what was than how was. So what actually happened, and as a result of that happening, what was the impact on your business? So I can give a very generic and high-level example here of some of the terminology about cybercrime. If it's an area of interest to you or your clients, then by all means contact me out of the webinar, and I'm happy to expand or pass on to our specialist forensic technology directors. So spam, electronic junk mail, unsolicited messages sent by email, text or instant goods without recipient's consent. And a good example of that, I previously used to run whistleblowing lines for some of the big corporates, and there was a regular fraud scam going around where people were sent an email saying that they'd inherited $7,000 either from a relative overseas, or that they were due a $7,000 rebate from a utilities company, and they were asked to go to Australia Post and pay a $200 release fee. Now you may think, who on earth in their right mind would believe that? Well, I can tell you that I would have received about 10 calls a month from this whistleblower line of people going into Western Union in order to transfer the $200 fee on the promise of getting $7,000 back. So it's a very real problem. Phishing is a way that criminals trap people into giving out their personal or financial details, often pretending to come from legitimate businesses such as banks or telecommunication providers. So there's a link and similarity there to spamming. And malware, which you may have heard about, is used to monitor your online activity and cause damage to the computer. It's often downloaded when people open an infected email attachment. Again, often a promise of free goods or tickets to the sporting event. And they can be used to steal your username and passwords, which is then forwarded to a third party. So this is systematic and organised crime. Unauthorised or hacking, we've touched on, but they can take on your identity and send out subsequent messages from your computer without you realising. A denial of service attack floods a computer or website with data which can overload the system or computer and prevent it from functioning properly. Unlike hacking or malware, it generally doesn't involve access to the computer system. A distributed denial of service, DDoS, which you may have heard, is a denial of service attack that comes from multiple systems, often a network of compromised computers. Let's look at another case study, a data breach affecting a major telecoms provider. So this is an interesting one. The owner of a marketing business was searching Google when he discovered that several large spreadsheets containing information about customers of a major telecom provider were freely accessible. One spreadsheet contained 1,700 records, including customer names, phone numbers, telephone plans, and home addresses. The other spreadsheets contained over 8,000 records with names and telephone numbers. Now, that was bad enough, but for the telco, in March 2014, the Office of Australian Information Commissioner and the Australian Communications and Media Authority found the telecoms provider breached privacy laws by failing to protect the personal information of those 15,000 customers, and fines and ongoing compliance monitoring were the receipts. So let's spend a little bit of time about gauging your own organisation's cybersecurity management. And again, cybersecurity, personal identification, identity theft is intrinsically linked. So this may be some 9 questions that you want to ask yourself or your clients around cybersecurity management, and that will give you a feeling fairly quickly as to where you sit on the scale of 1 to 100 with readiness. So is the threat of cybercrime on your risk register and or discussed? Now, risk registers are notoriously fickle for concentrating on operational risk, failing to dig deep into fraud and security. And I would be saying, first of all, is there cybercrime on your risk register? And secondly, is it detailed enough to be specific on the type of risks? Are you aware of the number of security incidents that occurred in the past year? So any organisation would expect to have spam emails coming through their servers or the occasional attack. Now, are they documented, and are you aware of the volume of those? Point 3 may seem a little over the top, James Bond-esque, but important all the same. Are executives or senior management machines checked for tampering or malicious software pre- and post-travel to high-risk countries? And there's been plenty of news released about Australian government officials not taking laptops or mobile phones into China. Do you have a security strategy and governance approach that is aligned with business strategy? By that we mean, have you conducted a risk assessment? And we'll talk a little bit about a risk assessment on the following slide. Do you have a tested incident response plan for cybersecurity issues? A couple of points to raise there is, it's one thing to have a theoretical plan in place, but cyber attacks and fraud very rarely come with warning. So you're likely to come into your office on a Monday morning and be immediately hit with a potential problem. The second area of interest there is that people often believe there's a plan in place but become uncertain and unclear once the issue hits. So by practicing and testing the instant response, rather like a fire alert, provides greater security should a problem arise. Question 6, you might think the answer is obvious, but do you have a clear insight into whether networks and data contained within it be breached? So do you even know if a cyber attack has taken place? Have you got the proactive controls in place to monitor for that type of thing? Number 7, do you know what's been lost or the value, both financial and reputational? So it's one thing to know the fence has been broached, but what was taken once they got through the fence? Think about the extent to which employees use personal devices for business. Is it done on a structured, formal way with firewalls and electronic security in place, or is it done casually to save time and money? And maybe a question to challenge yourself with: does a lack of transparency in cybercrime breaches lead to the situation that even after detection, cybercrime obviously goes unreported? So there's a genuine concern that even the levels of reported cybercrime are very much understated. So we've got 30 minutes, of which 5 minutes we can spend on addressing the issue. If there's anything here that touches a nerve, do let me know afterwards. But cybercrime, how do you address the issue? So you need to move from a needing to a wanting to address the issue. And by that I mean it's not about just being compliant for the sake of it. It's having a genuine concern around a desire to address the issue. Focus less on how much time and resources are deployed, more to where and how. So one of the standard problems with dealing with security or fraud risk is that throwing resources, time, technology at the wrong areas. And then the conducting of a cyber risk assessment. So we talked about that on the previous slide. So first of all is look at the as-is status. So what policies and procedures do you have? What current practices are in place? Identify the level of risk. Now that will be dependent on the industry you work in, the products and services you offer, go-to-market strategies, geographic location, staff engagement. So for example, an IT-focused country with business partners in Southeast Asia, or maybe remote operating in Australian states, is going to be more vulnerable than a CBD-centred retail store. So identifying level of risk is important. Think about what really matters. What are the crown jewels of your business? What is it that would bring your business down if there was a cyber attack? If you're offering an online shopping, then every minute of downtime is lost revenue. But maybe you've got intellectual property, business plans, confidential client information. What are the threats to suppliers, customers, and your own people? So if you suffer a cyber attack, what is the knock-on effect? Testing areas of potential vulnerability. So having done a review of the risks and identifying the risks is to test to see the security in place. And then identifying priority areas of risk and implementing a remediation plan. So you may have 20 areas of cyber risk. The important thing is to prioritise those down to being the most significant, half a dozen or so. And something we spoke about a little bit earlier is scenario planning. So testing proactive monitoring of systems to avoid the risk of future fraud, future cyber attacks. So another case study, this time the bushfires in Victoria in February 2009. One person created 112 fictitious identities which were used to claim disaster relief payments totaling over $100,000. This person was convicted of 2 counts for obtaining property by deception, sentenced to jail. They also have to repay the money that they had left, no doubt. So practically, what do you do if you believe you're a victim of identity crime? So you can report it immediately to the police. There's a 131 number, 131444 in all states except Victoria. Don't know why Victoria's alone, but there's a number there as well. Reporting the loss of theft to issuing organisations, so banks, private licence centres, financial institutions. And if your clients have a general welfare concern, then by all means contact ID Care on the 1300 number there, and they're a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week body that is there for victims of ID crime. So who are ID Care? They're a joint public-private partnership. Primary objective is to support the interests of victims of identity theft and misuse. They work with government and industry to independently assess capacity to respond to contemporary and emerging identity theft and misuse risks. So they can do risk assessments and accredit businesses around security of identity theft. What do they provide? Confidential hotline where expert case managers are available to answer questions. They provide access to alerts and bulletins on the latest scams and methods of protection, and they provide operational fraud investigation support as well. So outside of the legal and police type reporting, ID Care 24/7 is an organisation that can help, and they're happy to take all calls from all clients. So in summary, ID care and cybercrime, ID theft, ID risk and cybercrime can impact your organisation on a number of areas. It's financial, operational and reputational. The focus should be addressing that risk whilst the heat is off. By that I mean look at your controls proactively rather than wait until you're facing a big disclosure of information. A structured approach to the management of risk enables a balanced and proportional approach. So again, we talked about risk profiling, and depending on the type of organisation you are, will depend on the type of controls and protection you should have in place. And if you can get proactive, whilst the risk cannot be totally eradicated, its impact can be minimised. So your favourite logo there, I'll say, things going through unjust, fraud and never secure. That was from a Greek playwright who died 4,000 years BC. My details are there. There's my email, my desk line and my mobile number. If you've got more detailed or interests or questions regarding IT security, information security, identity security, please feel free to let me know. Questions we can take by email response or directly to me. I'm happy to take them offline at any time over the next days or weeks.